a very strict and focused businesswoman because working for Diddy for 6 years trained me to have to be perfect.
Working for Diddy?
Absolutely.
I love Diddy. You know, he's a good friend of mine. He's a good guy.
The following video is a dramatized and fictionalized narrative created solely for entertainment and educational purposes. On the 12th day of Sean Diddy Combs' federal trial, something happened that nobody could have predicted. As the courtroom buzzed with whispers and speculation, the heavy wooden doors opened, and in walked Donald J. Trump, the 45th President of the United States. Not as a supporter, not as a spectator, but as a potential witness. For months, rumors had swirled that Diddy's infamous freak-off parties involved high-profile celebrities, politicians, even clergy. But no one expected the former commander-in-chief to be directly linked. Now, for the first time, Trump's name isn't just in the headlines, it's in the courtroom transcript. What he saw, what he didn't say, and what happens when the most powerful man in America is asked to speak under oath. This changes everything. By the time Cassie Ventura took the stand on day 5, the public had already heard whispers about the tunnels, the freak-offs, the masks and rooms, but no one was prepared for the testimony that followed. She wasn't recounting a messy breakup or a toxic relationship. She was describing a hidden architecture of control, buried beneath a mansion, concealed behind foliage, masked in wealth. According to her, it started with a walk, not through a hallway, but down a concealed slope near Diddy's Los Angeles pool. Underneath the leaves, she said, was a hatch. Beneath that hatch, stairs, red lights, buzzing electronics, and a silence that made her skin crawl. Her voice didn't shake, and that's what made it worse. She remembered everything, every sound, every object, masks, oils, ropes, chains. A room that wasn't built for sex but submission, cameras in corners, furniture bolted to the floor, soundproof walls. She claimed the deeper they went, the colder it got, the less it felt like a home, and more like a facility. And that was just one room. Cassie said there were others. One without lights, one with only a bench and chains, another with wires and an unexplained control panel. She wasn't just describing physical architecture, she was describing a system. She wasn't even allowed to ask questions. The people in the rooms, masked, silent, motionless, weren't introduced. They weren't acknowledged. They were props. Maybe prisoners, maybe worse. She remembered Diddy's voice as they stood before the final door. "This is where I bring the ones I own." No one breathed when she said it. The courtroom didn't move. But what made it more disturbing wasn't just what Cassie revealed. It was what her story implied, that this wasn't isolated, that these weren't one-time horrors, that this setup, this entire underground network was built for recurring use, for guests, for parties, for people brought in under false pretenses and left changed, forgotten, or afraid to speak. And that's when the question shifted from what happened down there to who else was there. Because Cassie wasn't alone. Others knew, others watched, some even participated, and among them, allegedly, were names no one ever expected. One of them, a man with the most power on earth, but back then it was just a rumor, no proof. No one said it on record, until now. And that's when the real investigation began. The rumors had always existed in the shadows, vague mentions on forums, anonymous tips, blurry photos from exclusive parties. But it wasn't until Andrea Scher English filed her civil lawsuit that one name shattered the ceiling of plausible deniability: Donald J. Trump. English wasn't a household name. She wasn't famous, but what she claimed in her lawsuit sent a ripple through every newsroom that still had the courage to cover stories the mainstream avoided. A former adult entertainer, English said she was employed by Diddy for 5 years. At first, she thought she was entering the glamorous world of elite parties, money, fame. What she found, according to her sworn testimony, was a pipeline of coercion, masks, and abuse. She claimed she had been hired to perform, but quickly discovered these weren't performances. They were orchestrated events. Attendees were instructed to follow rules, maintain roles, consume unknown pills, and obey. She said she was often drugged, unable to consent, and forced into sexual encounters with both known and unknown guests. Her lawsuit detailed events held in the Hamptons, Miami, and luxury hotels, each with eerily similar structures: cameras, candles, costumes, and silence. And then came the bombshell. In her filing, Andrea stated clearly that she saw Donald Trump at one of these events. She didn't suggest he assaulted her. She didn't claim to know everything he did. But she was certain. The man who would later become the 45th president of the United States had been in that room, at that party, during one of Diddy's infamous freak-offs. And suddenly, this wasn't just a celebrity scandal. It was a geopolitical flashpoint. English's claims were met with immediate pushback. Diddy's team called her lawsuit fictional, a desperate grab for attention. Her own attorneys withdrew from the case weeks later, citing questionable conduct and difficulty working with her. The case, in legal terms, unraveled. But here's the part no one could ignore. Even after her lawyers walked, even after media buried the story, no one, not Diddy, not Trump, not a single representative, denied that Trump was present. The silence was deafening, because if the claim was completely fabricated, why not publicly refute it? Why not sue for defamation? Why not produce logs proving Trump was never near those events? Instead, what followed was avoidance, carefully worded denials, rejections of wrongdoing, but never of attendance. English named others too: Busta Rhymes, Paris Hilton, Diana Ross and her underage son, even Reverend Al Sharpton. She never accused them of anything specific, but the implication was clear. You were there, you saw, you knew. As for Trump, she said he wasn't just a guest. He was escorted, treated as a VIP, and while she never saw him participate directly in anything criminal, she remembered his face, his voice, his presence. That was enough to drag his name out of the shadows and into a courtroom where the truth had no more time to hide. And if even part of her testimony was true, it meant Trump wasn't an outsider to Diddy's world. He was inside it. The moment Andrea Shear English's lawsuit named Donald Trump as a party guest, the internet should have exploded. This wasn't a fringe conspiracy or anonymous rumor anymore. This was a sworn statement filed in court, linking a former president to an underground world of sexual coercion and drug-fueled rituals hosted by one of the most powerful moguls in music. But something strange happened. The story barely made a sound. Mainstream outlets that had covered every detail of Trump's past scandals, from Stormy Daniels to the Access Hollywood tape, seemed to collectively flinch. There were no headlines screaming "Trump named in Diddy sex case," no primetime debates, no breaking news segments on CNN or MSNBC. It was as if the allegation never happened. But why? Insiders pointed to legal caution. English's credibility had already been attacked. Her lawsuit withdrawn after her attorneys cited destructive behavior and possible inconsistencies. Diddy's representatives dismissed her as a serial fabricator. And Trump? His camp said nothing, not even to deny it. That silence spoke volumes. Because this is how powerful denial machines work. You don't address the allegation directly. You discredit the accuser, cast doubt on her motives, and wait for the media storm to pass. And it did. Almost. The alternative press picked up the scent. Blogs, TikTokers, and independent journalists began threading together old photos, flight records, party footage. They weren't proving guilt, but they were doing something more dangerous to the narrative. They were keeping the question alive. If English was lying, why wasn't Trump threatening legal action? If it was fake, why didn't Diddy's team produce footage clearing him and his guests? And here's the twist. While the media was bearing the story, the courts weren't. Behind closed doors, the federal investigation into Diddy's alleged sex trafficking operation didn't stop. If anything, it intensified. The FBI raid on his homes allegedly yielded hard drives, handwritten logs, and guest lists from years of elite gatherings. According to insiders, one code name stood out repeatedly: Code 45. Not just a nickname, a designation, a sign that someone important was not just expected, but protected. It was whispered that surveillance tapes existed, tapes no jury had seen, tapes no outlet dared publish. If true, they could show more than just faces. they could show how much America's elite really knew. But for now, there was only silence. From Trump, from Diddy, from the networks that claimed to speak truth to power. And that silence wasn't just strategic, it was terrifying. Because when the most powerful people in the world close ranks, the truth doesn't vanish, it gets buried. As the courtroom battled over what Cassie saw, and Andrea Scheer English's accusations buzzed quietly in the corners of the internet, federal investigators were following a colder, quieter trail. Paper. Not testimony, not rumors, but documents, invitations, guest lists. It was these silent witnesses that threatened to tell a story far more terrifying than anyone imagined. During the FBI's now infamous raids on Diddy's properties, including his Los Angeles mansion, his Miami compound, and his Hamptons estate, agents reportedly seized more than just electronics. According to leaks, they uncovered handwritten ledgers, internal emails, security logs, and encrypted drive contents that mapped out the infrastructure of what prosecutors now call a long-running sex trafficking enterprise. A system, one built around power, secrecy, and high-level protection. At the center of these documents were names, some real, some disguised by code names. One in particular kept resurfacing, Code 45. At first, it sounded like a coincidence, but then came the patterns. Code 45, arrival 11:17 p.m. Code 45 requires separate entrance. No staff permitted in East Wing during Code 45 session. Over a dozen mentions, all from different nights, different venues, all pointing to one guest, former President Donald J. Trump. Investigators couldn't confirm it right away, but the contextual clues were too consistent to ignore. Code 45 wasn't a number assigned at random. It was deliberate. And in the world of political shorthand, 45 doesn't refer to age or a hotel room. It refers to the 45th President of the United States. Even more chilling were the attached notes. On at least 3 occasions, internal staff emails listed Code 45 as one of the VIPs for what were labeled private theme sessions, another name for what English called freak-offs. These weren't calendar invites. They were instructions, what to prepare, who to exclude, what not to record. One entry allegedly read, "Ensure discretion for Code 45, only trusted staff, no filming, stripped security feeds after midnight." Then came the guest rosters: Paris Hilton, Al Sharpton, Busta Rhymes. Evan Ross, Diana Ross's son, listed as ER next to minor English, claimed she saw him at a party while still underage. Others were described only by initials, but one stood out: DT/SS. DT, Donald Trump. SS-Secret Service? If that's what it meant, it wouldn't just confirm his presence. It would suggest it was planned, coordinated, protected. Still, this wasn't enough to bring Trump into court. Allegations are one thing, confirmed appearances another. Prosecutors needed more than guest lists. They needed someone who could look under oath and say, "He was there. I saw him. He participated." And that witness was already waiting in the wings. But before they brought her forward, they had one final legal card to play. They would summon Trump himself. Someone's forced to dig it up. It was the kind of legal maneuver no one saw coming, at least not this soon. While most expected Donald Trump's name to hover in the margins of Diddy's trial like an unresolved shadow, the prosecution had different plans. On day 11, in a sealed motion that only later became public, federal prosecutors made it official. They were calling Donald J. Trump to testify under oath. The courtroom didn't even have time to process the shock. Trump's legal team immediately filed an emergency motion to quash the subpoena. They argued executive privilege, irrelevance, and political bias. "This is a desperate stunt," one of his lawyers claimed. But the judge didn't blink. After a closed-door review, the ruling came down. The subpoena stood. Donald Trump would appear in court, not as a defendant, not as a symbol, but as a material witness in a federal trial investigating coercion, trafficking, and organized abuse. The headlines that followed were seismic. Former presidents simply don't get pulled into sex trafficking cases, especially not while they're running for re-election. Yet here it was, federal court, open session, cameras banned but journalists present. and all of them waiting to see whether the most powerful man in America would deny everything or crack under oath. On the morning of day 12, the courtroom line wrapped around the block. Extra security was brought in. Secret Service agents scanned every corner. Inside, the energy was thick, like something historic was about to unfold. And then it happened. The doors opened. The room fell silent. Donald Trump entered the courtroom. He looked composed, confident even, dressed in his trademark navy suit and red tie, flanked by lawyers and Secret Service. He approached the witness stand like a man attending a press conference, not a criminal proceeding. But he wasn't there to talk to cameras. He was there to talk to a jury. He raised his right hand, swore to tell the truth. And then the questions began. Prosecutors started slow, establishing context. Mr. Trump, do you know Sean Combs? Yes. Have you attended events hosted by Mr. Combs? Yes, several over the years. Then came the curveball. Were you present at an event held at Mr. Combs' Hamptons property, summer of 2006, identified in court as a private theme session? Trump blinked. For the first time, he hesitated. I may have been. I don't recall the specifics. That one sentence shifted the courtroom's energy, because now the former president wasn't denying involvement. He was distancing himself from memory. The prosecution pressed harder. Do you recall interacting with Andrea Scheer-English? I don't know who that is. She testified that you were present during at least one private session. Can you deny that under oath? Trump turned to his lawyer, then answered, I can't confirm or deny what someone else says about a party from 18 years ago. I meet thousands of people. It wasn't a denial. It wasn't even a defense. It was a tactical retreat. And in that moment, the prosecution smelled blood. Because whether Trump realized it or not, his presence had just been confirmed in front of a federal jury under oath. And that changed everything. The courtroom was frozen in time. Every pen halted mid-stroke. Every throat clenched with anticipation. Donald Trump, the 45th President of the United States, was now officially under oath in one of the most disturbing celebrity trials in recent history. His every word would be transcribed, dissected, and remembered, not just by the court, but by the entire world. Trump remained poised, but the tone in his voice had shifted. Gone was the bluster of rallies or the swagger of press rooms. What replaced it was calculated caution, a man who knew that every sentence could set off legal aftershocks far beyond the courtroom walls. He admitted he had been to multiple events hosted by Sean Combs over the years. Yes, I've attended gatherings, he said, business functions, charity events, parties. I was in entertainment circles at the time. The prosecution nodded but pushed forward. Were these parties ever referred to as freak-offs in your presence? I've never heard that term before this trial. They moved in closer. Do you remember being asked to enter through a separate entrance? Being escorted away from public areas at one of these gatherings? Trump hesitated. I can't speak to security procedures. Sometimes people want privacy, especially high-profile individuals. Then came the photos. Surveillance stills, blurry, time-stamped, but undeniable. Trump standing at Diddy's estate gate, shaking hands with a man later identified as Diddy's chief of security. Inside the party, a red-lit room in the background. A woman in a latex outfit, her face blurred. Trump's defense immediately objected. Context unclear, identity unconfirmed. The judge allowed the question anyway. Mr. Trump, is that you in this image? He leaned forward, looked. It appears to be me. The room went silent again. And then the prosecution asked the question that would haunt the next week of media coverage. Did you ever witness any behavior at these events that could be described as coercive, abusive, or involving non-consensual acts? Trump paused. For the first time, his composure wavered. I can't say what was happening behind closed doors, he finally said. If something wrong happened, I wasn't aware of it, not at any event I attended. It was a classic deflection, but the damage was done. He had placed himself at the scene. He had acknowledged being present. And most damning of all, he had stopped short of issuing a full denial. He was careful. He was vague. And in the eyes of the jury, he was suddenly no longer a myth or a name in a tabloid. He was a man who had walked those halls, breathed that air, and left without asking too many questions. And when you're the most powerful man in the world, not asking can say just as much as doing. If Trump thought he was walking out untouched, the cross-examination made it clear. This wasn't just theater, it was war. And the prosecution had been waiting years to ask these questions. Under oath, on the record, in a courtroom that didn't run on headlines but on truth. They began with timelines. Mr. Trump, earlier you stated you didn't recall specifics about the 2006 Hamptons event. Is that correct? Yes. Then how do you explain the security logs showing your arrival at 11:17 p.m. and departure at 4:03 a.m.? Trump adjusted in his seat. I may have stayed longer than I remember. It was a long time ago. Then came the staff emails. One read, "Prepare East Wing for Code 45, Red Room. No audio, sound off feeds, only VIP roster permitted." The attorney raised his eyes. "Is Code 45 a reference to you?" Trump's lawyer objected. The judge allowed the question. Trump hesitated. "I wouldn't know what staff called me. That could be anything." Then they dropped the message from Diddy's assistant, dated 2 hours before the event. "Ensure Code 45 is kept off main cameras. Escort discreetly. VIP treatment." This time, Trump didn't respond immediately. He glanced toward his legal team, then back at the prosecution. "I can't confirm internal conversations from Mr. Combs' team. I wasn't aware of what names they used." But the prosecution wasn't done. They produced a text sent from a burner phone, seized during the raid, linked to Diddy's security detail. 45 and the dancer in Red Room, no interruptions, English prepped and briefed. Trump tensed. His lawyer objected again, heavily. The judge allowed the line of questioning to continue, pending authentication. "Do you deny being in a room alone with Andrea Scheer English during any event hosted by Mr. Combs?" Trump's face stiffened. "I don't recall ever being in a private room with that woman. And if she testifies you were, she's lying? I'm saying I don't remember her." The prosecution moved on, but the courtroom had already changed. This wasn't the composed president calmly sidestepping questions anymore. This was a man dodging bullets, slipping on timelines, hiding behind selective memory. And then came the whisper. The final exhibit, a message attributed to Diddy, backed up on a now decrypted iCloud file. "Tonight's energy is presidential. No cameras, no names, just trust." The courtroom gasped. The judge called for a short recess, but the damage was irreversible. Trump's myth of distance had cracked. He wasn't just in the orbit of this world, he had stepped into it. For hours, quietly, repeatedly. And now the jury knew it. When court resumed after the recess, there was a shift in the air. More than tension, it was anticipation. The prosecution had one more card to play. A woman who had, until now, been referred to only in sealed documents. She had worked deep inside Diddy's inner circle. She had seen things, coordinated things, and now with limited immunity, she was prepared to speak. They called her to the stand as JW, a former personal assistant to Diddy from 2005 to 2009. She walked in quietly, avoided eye contact with the defendant, and took her oath without hesitation. Her identity was protected from public disclosure, but inside the courtroom, her story was anything but concealed. JW confirmed what the prosecution had hinted for days, that Diddy's events weren't just parties. They were orchestrated nights, built like productions, with cast lists, themes, and, most critically, VIP protocols. Every person had a role. Guests were vetted. The real events started after the public ones ended, she said, and only trusted staff were allowed near the second phase. The courtroom leaned in as she described how guests were categorized. Some were red-coded, some blue, but one was gold. That was Code 45. Did you know who that referred to at the time? Yes. Who? Donald Trump. The gasp in the room was audible. JW continued, explaining how she was instructed to prepare rooms specifically for Code 45's arrival on 3 occasions. "We were told to clean them in advance, ensure discretion, remove phones and clocks. He always came late, always left early morning." She recalled Andrea Scheer English by name, said she was prepped before each of those nights, handed outfits, briefed on instructions, and escorted into the same section of the estate. She never looked excited. She looked scared, JW said. I brought her water once, and she grabbed my wrist. She whispered, "Please don't leave me in here." When asked who coordinated the arrangements, JW looked directly at Diddy. Him, she said. And one time, she wasn't scheduled, but he said, "The president's request." That's when I knew something was different. The courtroom sat motionless as she revealed the most chilling moment of all. The next morning, I was told to wipe the security system. Not just delete, strip the hard drives, start fresh. I asked why, and the answer was, what happens in gold stays in gold. When asked who gave the order, she answered without blinking. His head of security told me it came from someone above Diddy. Who? The prosecution pressed. As Donald Trump's testimony echoed through the courtroom and JW's chilling account settled over the jury like a thundercloud, the outside world was already shifting. News cycles scrambled to catch up. Independent journalists pushed clips of court transcripts onto every feed. Hashtags erupted. Averin, Code 45, our Diddy trial, Naur freak off files. But one question loomed larger than any headline. What does this mean for the 2024 election? Because this wasn't just about what happened in the dark halls of a mansion. This was about who was there and who might be going back to the White House. Trump was already the presumptive Republican nominee. His rallies drew thousands. His loyal base had withstood scandals that would have ended any other career, multiple indictments, an insurrection, civil trials, and more. But this was different. This wasn't political corruption or financial fraud. This was the world of sex trafficking, coerced silence, and underground chambers lit by red lights. And now Trump's name was in the testimony, not in tabloids, not in Twitter threads, in court, under oath, with former staffers confirming he was there, that he had his own entrance, his own name in the system, that he was part of gold-level sessions involving women who later came forward broken, drugged, and afraid. Political analysts debated whether it would stick. Nothing takes him down, some argued. He's built to survive scandal. But others whispered what many were now thinking aloud. This is different. This isn't about being polarizing. This is about being implicated. Because even if Trump isn't charged, even if he walks away legally untouched, voters are now forced to imagine their commander-in-chief walking through the same tunnels Cassie described. Past the mask, past the ropes, into rooms where people said no and weren't heard. And yet something even more disturbing was happening. The silence. No statement from Trump's team denying the events. No press conference slamming the witnesses. Just vague denials, procedural complaints, and "I don't remember" repeated like a prayer. That vacuum of defense is now louder than any accusation, because it's not just about whether Trump broke the law, it's about whether he looked away when others did. And in an election year, where morality is shouted from podiums and righteousness is printed on campaign posters, voters are being asked to decide something far more difficult than left or right. They're being asked if they can vote for a man who was there and said nothing. She hesitated, then said, "They just called him the friend from DC," but everyone knew who that meant. And with that, silence dropped like a stone across the courtroom. Because if what she said was true, the implications weren't just scandalous, they were national. A former US president wasn't just attending, he was being protected.